The rain fell in slow, deliberate sheets across the empty street, painting the world in silver reflections. Elena Carter gripped her steering wheel, frustration curling in her chest as her aging car sputtered one last time and died. The engine's last sigh left her stranded at the edge of the city, where the lights thinned and the shadows grew deeper. She tried the ignition twice, then 3 times, but the only response was a tired click and a puff of smoke that curled into the damp air. Through the veil of rain, she saw the faint glow of a sign across the road, Hayes Auto and Repair, its neon letters flickering like an exhausted heartbeat. With her umbrella broken and her shoes already soaked, Elena pushed the car door open and stepped into the storm. Cold drops ran down her face, seeping into her hair as she crossed the puddle-filled lot. She paused under the flickering light, catching her breath, her heart still racing from the sudden stop and the eerie quiet that surrounded her. Inside the garage, the scent of oil and steel filled the air. Tools clinked softly, somewhere in the shadows. A radio hummed an old song, something slow and sad that sounded like it had been playing for hours. And then she saw him. He stood, half hidden beneath the lifted hood of a dusty pickup truck, sleeves rolled to his elbows, grease smudging the skin of his forearms. His hair, dark and slightly unkempt, clung to his forehead from the humidity. When he looked up, his eyes met hers. Warm brown, steady, and so unexpectedly gentle that she almost forgot why she'd come in. "Can I help you?" His voice was quiet, roughened by long hours and few words. "My car just died out there," Elena said, gesturing helplessly toward the rain. "It won't even turn over." He wiped his hands on a rag, glancing out the window where her car sat like a lonely ghost under the streetlight. "You picked a rough night for trouble." "Oh, dear." He smiled slightly, just enough to soften his face. "I'll take a look. Give me a minute." Elena watched as he pulled on his jacket and disappeared into the storm. A few moments later, she heard the sound of her car's hood creaking. Open, the rhythm of the rain blending with the metallic clatter of tools. She leaned against the doorframe, feeling the warmth from the garage against her back, and for a strange moment felt safe. When he returned, the rain had flattened his hair and dampened his shirt, but there was something almost serene in the way he moved, calm, capable, without a trace of complaint. "Loose connection," he said, brushing his hands clean. "Should be good to go now." She reached for her purse. "How much do I owe you?" He shook his head, smiling faintly. "Nothing. It took 2 minutes. Just drive safe." Elena hesitated, searching his face for a reason. People didn't do favors like that anymore. Not in this city. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said, turning back to his workbench. "Consider it a welcome to the edge of nowhere." She laughed softly, the sound surprising even her. "Well, thank you, Mr. Mechanic, I owe you one." He looked up then, eyes catching the light. "Liam," he said, "Liam Reed." "Elena," she replied. Their names hung in the air for a moment, a fragile bridge between two strangers on a rain-soaked night. When she stepped back into the rain, the world felt changed somehow, softer, as if her small corner of misfortune had collided with something meaningful. Through the downpour, she saw him leaning against the garage doorway, watching her start the car. The engine purred back to life. As her taillights disappeared into the storm, Liam stood alone in the doorway, the rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His hand brushed against the side of the car she'd left behind, a ghost of her warmth still lingering in the metal. "Maybe she's different," he murmured to himself, the words lost beneath the rain. Behind him the radio crackled, the old song fading into silence. And for a moment, the mechanic with the kind eyes didn't look like a poor man at all. He looked like someone running from a life too heavy to bear, standing in the only place where he could still be unseen. Rain clouds still hung over the city the next morning, as Elena found herself driving past the same small garage again, her fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. She told herself she was only checking that her car was fine, but her heart knew better. Something about the man she'd met the night before lingered in her mind the way his quiet smile had felt. Genuine in a world that rarely was, she spotted him through the open bay door, wearing the same grease-stained jacket, his hair slightly messy from work. The sight made her pulse quicken. She parked across the street and walked in carrying a paper tray with 2 cups of coffee. The air inside was filled with the hum of an old fan and the low rhythm of a blues song playing on the radio. When Liam looked up, surprise flashed in his eyes before softening into warmth. "Morning," she said, holding out the coffee. "I figured after fixing my car in the rain, you might need this." He accepted it with a small laugh. "You didn't have to, but thank you. That's the best kind of apology for working too late." Elena leaned against the counter, her eyes scanning. The cluttered space, every corner, spoke of long hours and solitude. A single photo taped to the wall caught her attention. It showed Liam younger, cleaner, dressed in a suit, standing beside a tall building model. It didn't fit the room or the man. Before her, and before she could stop herself, she asked, "Are you an architect?" He froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled faintly. "Used to be just small projects, nothing important." The words came out too easily, too rehearsed, but Elena didn't. A push-a-car horn blared outside, breaking the silence. An old man shuffled into the shop, complaining about an engine that coughed like a dying dog. Liam excused himself and went to work, sleeves rolled high, muscles moving under his shirt as he focused. With quiet patience, Elena watched how he spoke gently to the man, how he refused extra payment, how his kindness seemed to cost him nothing, yet mean everything. When the old man left, she asked, "Why don't you charge what it's worth? You could make more money." He wiped his hands and said, "Not everything worth doing should be about money." His answer stayed with her as she helped him tidy the shop. He teased her gently for not knowing a wrench from a screwdriver. She laughed for the first time, in days feeling lighter than she had in months, when a sudden crash of thunder shook the building. Liam looked toward the open door, his expression tightening. She caught the flicker of something almost fear before he masked it with another smile. Ended up sitting together on overturned crates, drinking the last of their coffee, while rain hammered the roof. Elena asked, "Where are you from?" Liam hesitated before answering, "Nowhere." "I want to remember an everywhere. I'd rather forget." That answer left her curious and unsettled. She didn't know if it meant heartbreak or exile, but she sensed both when she told him she worked double shifts at the hospital to help her mother pay rent. His gaze softened. "You deserve better than this city," he said. "Maybe one day you'll get it." As she stood to leave, lightning flashed, and for a moment she saw something metallic glint under his sleeve, a gold watch too fine for a poor mechanic. Their eyes met, and he quickly pulled his sleeve down, pretending nothing had happened. Her heart skipped. She smiled anyway, pretending not to notice, but the image burned into her mind. When she drove away, she saw him standing again in the doorway, rain running down his face, his hand absently touching the cupboard. Watch the look in his eyes. Wasn't that of a mechanic. It was of a man guarding a secret too big to share, a man who'd built walls around his truth. And for the first time, Elena wondered if she was falling for someone who wasn't who he claimed to be. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm Elena couldn't quite name. She started bringing small excuses to stop by the garage, a broken taillight, a noise under the hood. Even when she knew nothing was wrong, there was something about the quiet of that shop and the man who worked there that steadied her after long hospital shifts. Liam had a way of listening that made her feel like her voice mattered in a city that often forgot people like her existed. Sometimes he'd fix small things, without even charging her, just handing her the keys and saying, "Drive safe," like it was a prayer. One evening, she arrived after sunset, the air heavy with the scent of rain again. Liam was outside, leaning against the doorframe, smoking a cigarette. He dropped it quickly when he saw her and smiled, that same gentle curve that melted the day's exhaustion off her shoulders. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said, voice rough from the cold. "It's not the safest neighborhood. I could say the same." "About you," Elena replied, smiling back as she handed him a cup of coffee. It had become their quiet ritual. They sat together as the garage lights flickered, casting gold halos around the tools and machines. She told him about her patients, about an old woman who reminded her of her mother, about a child who held her hand after getting stitches. Liam listened, his eyes soft but distant sometimes, as if he were fighting ghosts. She couldn't see. She asked about his past, but his answers were always vague stories that ended before they truly began. Once, when she mentioned family, his jaw clenched so tightly she changed the subject. That night, while she was washing her hands at the small sink, she noticed a wallet sitting half open on the workbench. Curiosity tugged at her before guilt could stop her. She glanced inside. There was no cash, just a black card with the emblem of an exclusive bank she had only ever seen in magazines. Her heart stumbled a little when she put it back, pretending nothing had happened. When Liam returned from the back room, she caught a flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he'd noticed too. The next day, a sleek black car was parked across the street from the garage, tinted windows glinting in the light. It didn't belong in that neighborhood. Liam stiffened when he saw it, his hand tightening around the wrench he was holding. She asked if everything was all right, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably someone lost. Still, the tension in his shoulders didn't fade. Later that night, as she drove home, she saw the same car following her in the reflection of her rearview mirror. It stayed just far enough behind to disappear. When she turned into her street, she sat in the dark of her driveway, heart pounding. Not sure if she was imagining things. The next morning she told Liam about it. He looked pale for a moment, then forced a smile. "Probably just coincidence," he said, but his eyes were shadowed with something like fear. Their laughter grew rarer after that, replaced by long silences heavy with what neither dared to say. Elena could feel something pulling them apart, not because of distance, but because of the invisible weight Liam carried. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd stare at the horizon like a man watching a fire burn down a home he couldn't save. And then one night he didn't show up. The garage stood dark and locked when she arrived, the coffee in her hands growing cold against her palms. The silence around the building felt wrong too, still too final. She looked through the small window and saw the photo that had always hung on the wall, the one of him beside the architectural model. It was gone. Only a clean square mark remained where it had been. And for the first time she realized she didn't even know the real name of the man she was falling in love with. Elena didn't sleep that night. She kept replaying the image of the empty wall where Liam's photograph had been, as though a missing picture could erase the man himself. By morning the rain had stopped, but the city felt colder, quieter. Her stomach twisted with a sense of wrongness that wouldn't fade. She called the garage twice. No answer. She even drove there after her hospital shift, only to find the shutters pulled down, a fresh padlock gleaming in the sunlight. The world moved as if nothing had happened, but something inside her knew everything. Had she asked around at the diner across the street, the waitress shook her head. Said the mechanic had packed up overnight, loaded his things into a truck and disappeared without a word. Left behind a single note for the landlord, rent paid 6 months in advance. That's not something a poor man does, Elena thought, gripping her cup too tightly. The coffee burned her tongue, but she didn't feel it. 3 days later, she received a brown envelope slid under her apartment door. Inside was a small folded paper with her name written in handwriting. She recognized it said, "Thank you for believing in me. Take care of yourself. Always, Liam." Nothing more. No address, no number, no explanation. She pressed the paper to her chest as tears blurred the ink. He was gone, but his absence felt alive, like something waiting to be understood. Weeks passed, and Elena tried to bury herself in work. But his face haunted her, the sound of his laughter, the way he had looked at her, as if she was the only real thing left in a life made of lies. Every night she told herself to move on, and every night she found herself driving past the empty garage just to see the darkness behind its doors. One evening she stayed late at the hospital, a storm rolling back over the city, thunder growling like an old warning when she finally left the parking lot. She noticed a black car parked across the street, its headlights off the same car she'd seen before. Her pulse raced. She drove faster. Turning down side streets, the car followed, keeping its distance, but never disappearing by the time she reached her apartment. The fear in her chest had turned to anger. She got out, slamming her door, and shouted into the rain, "Who are you? What do you want, a man?" Stepped out from the car, tall, wearing a dark coat. His voice calm. "Miss Carter, my name is Daniel Marsh. I'm with Hayes Security." Her breath caught. That name was familiar from the photo from the architectural plaque in Liam's old office. She'd seen it months ago on a charity brochure. Hayes Enterprises. Her heart pounded as Daniel handed her a card. "Mr. Hayes requests that you stop looking for him. He's safe, but he wishes to be left alone." The world tilted. The name Hayes echoed in her ears, and the truth began to form, sharp and terrifying. Liam Reed wasn't just gone. He'd never existed. He had used another name, another life, and everything about him had been a carefully constructed lie. Her knees nearly gave out as she clutched the card. Daniel was already walking back to his car before she found her voice. "Tell him I'm not stopping until I know why." That night, lightning flashed outside her window, illuminating the note she still kept on her dresser. "Thank you for believing in me now." The words looked different, darker. Maybe a warning, maybe an apology. She didn't know, but deep down, she felt the storm wasn't just in the sky anymore. It was coming. Elena woke before dawn, her apartment heavy with silence and half-formed questions. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had walked out of her life, and the security officer who had spoken his name. Hayes Enterprises, the words replayed. In her mind, like a riddle waiting to be solved, she opened her laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed the name into the search bar. The screen filled with headlines. Liam Hayes, award-winning architect, youngest billionaire in New York, heir to Hayes Global Holdings. Photographs appeared, his face sharper, more confident, but still unmistakably the same man who had fixed her car under the rain. Her chest constricted. He wasn't just lying about being poor, he had lied about everything. She scrolled through images of glittering events, charity galas and skyscrapers that bore his signature design. In one picture, he stood beside an older woman in a silver gown, Margaret Hayes, his mother. The caption read, "The formidable matriarch of the Hayes dynasty." Elena clicked through pages until she found an interview clip. Liam's voice filled her room, calm, distant, polished. He spoke about innovation, responsibility, and the weight of legacy, not a single trace of the quiet mechanic who had smiled at her over coffee, remained anger, flared hotter than shock. She grabbed her jacket and drove across the city to the glass tower of Hayes Global, the kind of place that reflected the sky itself. Security stopped her at the lobby, but she refused to back down. She told them she was a nurse from St. John's Hospital, and that she needed to deliver urgent documents. It was a lie, but she had learned something from him. Lies open doors they shouldn't. When the elevator opened on the 37th floor, the world above the city looked unreal, everything sleek, polished, expensive through the glass walls. She saw him sitting in a conference room, surrounded by men in suits. He looked older, colder, untouchable when he noticed her standing there. His expression flickered between disbelief and pain. The meeting dissolved instantly, as if the air itself had shifted. Elena stood frozen until he spoke softly, almost pleading. "Elena, you shouldn't be here." "Why?" she asked, voice trembling. "Is this where the poor mechanic works these days?" The words sliced through him. He dismissed his staff with a nod. The doors closed behind them. He stepped closer, but she stepped back. Every inch between them felt like a battlefield. He told her everything, or at least part of it, that his real name was Liam Hayes, that he'd grown tired of people loving his name and not his heart, that he had wanted to disappear to find someone real. She was supposed to be a chance to start over, not a casualty. His voice broke when he said her name again, but she didn't move. "You used me," she said quietly. "You made me believe in something that never existed." He reached for her hand. She pulled away. His touch burned like betrayal. "You were the only thing that was real," he whispered, but it was too late. She turned and walked away past the glass halls that reflected their shattered story. Her reflection blurred with his until both were gone. That night, Liam sat in his penthouse, staring at a single photograph of her. He had secretly taken at the garage, her hair damp from rain, her smile faint and honest in a world full of masks. He had never felt poorer in his life while Elena drove through the city lights, her eyes full of tears and fury she didn't know yet. That the man she had left behind was already planning to destroy everything he owned, just to prove he still had something true left to give her. Liam hadn't left the city. He had vanished into it, changing phone numbers, homes, and names again. But the weight of what he'd done refused to fade every night. He stood by his penthouse window, watching the same streets where Elena lived, the distance between them growing wider with every secret that stayed buried. His mother, Margaret, had come back into his life, furious, cold, and determined to protect the family name. "You're destroying everything," she told him when she found out about the mechanic disguise. "The company board, the shareholders. They think you've lost your mind. Maybe I have," he said quietly, "because for the first time in my life I did something real." Meanwhile, Elena couldn't stop thinking about him. She hated him for the lies, but the memory of his eyes haunted her. Even in sleep, she told herself she wanted nothing more to do with him yet. Every time she passed a newspaper stand, her gaze found his face. She had begun volunteering at a shelter near the industrial district, the same neighborhood where his company had secretly started funding renovation projects. She didn't know it yet, but their paths were about to cross again. One rainy evening, the shelter's roof began to leak water, pouring over medical supplies. Elena climbed onto the ladder, trying to tape a plastic sheet, but the wind tore it away. A strong hand caught her wrist, steadying her. She looked down and froze. Liam stood there, drenched from the storm, eyes filled with disbelief and longing. The world seemed to stop. He helped her down, his hands trembling. She wanted to slap him, scream at him, but instead she just whispered, "Why are you here?" His voice broke. "I never stopped being here." She turned to walk away, but he followed, saying, "I know you'll never forgive me, but let me help. I can fix this place. The roof, the supplies, everything." "You don't need to fix anything," she said. "I just needed the truth." He reached into his coat and pulled out a check, enough money to save the shelter for years. She refused to take it, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw something hollow beyond. Wealth guilt that had turned into devotion. That night the shelter lights flickered as they worked side by side in silence, fixing leaks, sorting boxes. He didn't mention his company or his money. She didn't ask how he'd found her when she finally Sat down exhausted, he placed his jacket over her shoulders and whispered, "I built towers for strangers, but I would tear them all down if it meant rebuilding what I broke between us." The next day, reporters swarmed the shelter. News had leaked that the mysterious donor funding dozens of city projects was none other than Liam Hayes, billionaire heir, hiding behind anonymous charities. Elena watched him from the doorway as cameras surrounded him. For a moment, his eyes met hers, and the world fell. Away again, he wasn't a lie standing there drenched in flashlights and rain. He was a man trying to make amends through love and ruin. When the reporters left, he approached her quietly and said, "The truth is out now. No more masks, no more lies. What you do with it is your choice." She looked at him, torn between pride and love. The sound of thunder rolled overhead, and for the first time she didn't walk away, because beneath the storm she finally saw the man. Not the money, not the lie, just Liam, and the truth he was trying to rebuild, even if it cost him everything. The world didn't stay quiet after Liam's identity was exposed within days. His secret life as the poor mechanic who had lived among the working class became a national headline. Every news outlet ran his story. Some called it a romantic experiment. Others called it manipulation. The board at Hayes Enterprises panicked and demanded his resignation. They wanted to distance the company from scandal. His mother was livid, appearing on camera to declare that her son had been suffering from emotional instability, while Liam refused to defend himself. He simply signed the papers and walked away, leaving behind the empire that had defined his name since birth. Elena watched the chaos unfold from the sidelines, torn between anger and pity. She saw footage of him being chased by reporters. His face haunted. The man who had once hidden his wealth was now stripped bare under the public eye. Every night she told herself she was done with him, and yet she found herself awake, replaying the way he had looked at her in the rain when the world wasn't watching, when he was just Liam, the man who loved her. A week later, the shelter received another anonymous donation. This time, it wasn't money. It was an architectural blueprint, carefully rolled and sealed with wax, her name written across it. Elena unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a design for a new community health center, her name etched into the foundation. The structure was simple, functional, and breathtaking. She knew immediately whose hands had drawn it and what it meant. She found him at the edge of the city, standing before an abandoned construction site where his dream project once stood. Reporters had long since stopped coming. He looked thinner. His suit rumpled his eyes. Tired when he saw her, he didn't smile. He simply said, "I was hoping you'd come. I didn't come for you," she lied. "I came for answers." He nodded as if he'd expected that. "Then tell me what you want to know." "Why did you pretend?" she asked. "Because I wanted to know what love felt like without price tags, because I thought I'd lost the right to it." His voice cracked. "I thought if I stripped away the name, the money, maybe I could find what was real again." The wind picked up, whipping through the unfinished steel frames around them, rain beginning to fall. Elena stepped closer, searching his face for deception, but all she saw was regret. He said softly, "I've lost everything because of this, and if I had to do it all over again, I would still choose you." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating their faces. She whispered, "You can't fix this with money or buildings or press conferences. You broke something that was never supposed to be broken." He nodded. "I know, but I'm still going to try to build something that proves you changed me." Before she could answer, a loud crash echoed from above. A beam, loosened by the storm, shifted dangerously without thinking. Liam pushed her out of the way, just as metal came crashing down. Dust and rain filled the air. She screamed his name when it cleared. He was lying on the ground, blood streaking down his forehead, but his eyes were open, staring at her with a faint smile. "I told you I'd build something real," he whispered. Then darkness. took him. Elena knelt beside him, her hands shaking as sirens wailed in the distance. She pressed her forehead to his chest, whispering, "Don't you dare die on me, Liam. Not now. Not when I'm finally ready to forgive you." And as the rain poured harder, washing away the dirt and blood, she realized the truth. She didn't want revenge. She wanted him alive. She wanted a second chance with the man who had built his redemption out of lies, love, and sacrifice. The hospital lights were too bright and too white. They made everything feel like a dream. Elena sat in the hallway outside the operating room, her hands stained with dried blood that wasn't her own. Her scrubs were soaked, her heart beating faster than the monitors inside. Every time the doctor opened, she flinched. The image of Liam lying under the collapsing beam burned behind her eyelids. Paramedics had said he was lucky to even be breathing, but luck didn't feel like enough. Hours passed before the surgeon stepped out, his expression unreadable. He's alive, but he's not out of danger. Severe head trauma, 2 broken ribs, and a punctured lung. Elena felt her knees weaken as relief and fear tangled together. "Can I see him?" The doctor hesitated only for a moment. "Room 12, he said. Quietly, he's unconscious, but he might hear you." She walked into the room and froze. Liam lay surrounded by machines, tubes, and wires, his face pale, his hand limp against the sheets. The man who once built skyscrapers now looked fragile, like he could vanish. If she blinked too long, she pulled up a chair and took his hand, whispering, "You are the most infuriating man I've ever met, and I can't lose you. Not like this, not before I understand why my heart still wants you." Days turned into nights. She barely left his side, reading old magazines aloud, just to fill the silence. She told him about her patients, about the shelter, about how the city wouldn't stop talking about the billionaire who pretended to be poor. She didn't know if he could hear her, but every now and then his fingers twitched against hers. One evening, she felt him squeeze her hand, weak but certain. His eyelids fluttered open, confusion flickering before recognition filled his gaze. "You came," he rasped, voice rough. "From disuse you nearly died." She whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Why do you always show up just to break my heart and then try to fix it?" He tried to smile. "Because you're the only thing that ever felt worth breaking for." Before she could answer, the door opened. Margaret Hayes stood there, her presence sharp as glass, her eyes flicking between her son and Elena. "I warned you," she said coldly. "This woman ruined you." Liam tried to sit up, but pain forced him back. Elena met Margaret's a glare without flinching. "I didn't ruin him," she said quietly. "He just finally became human." Margaret turned away, her voice trembling with fury. "You will never belong in his world." Elena waited until she left, then looked at Liam. "You should go back. To her empire, to your name, to everything you threw away." He shook his head slowly. "I don't want the empire, I want you. I want the life we almost had before I lied." She placed her hand on his chest, feeling the faint rhythm of his heartbeat. "Don't. Promise me things you can't keep." That night, when she finally left the hospital, the air outside felt different. Colder thunder rolled in the distance, and lightning flashed over the city skyline. She looked up at the tallest tower bearing his name and wondered how much longer fate could keep tearing them apart before either of them broke completely. Back in his hospital room, Liam stared at the rain through the window. A storm gathering both outside and inside him, and whispered into the darkness, "I'll prove it this time. I'll show her the man beneath the ruins." Three weeks later, the city had already moved on from the headlines, but Elena hadn't. The story of the fallen billionaire turned ghost of scandal still played in whispers through hospital corridors and coffee shops. She ignored it all, spending every spare moment at the rehabilitation ward where Liam was recovering. He was walking again, slowly, still weaker than before, but alive. His scars ran deeper than the bruises on his ribs. He rarely spoke about the accident or the company he'd lost. Instead, he asked about the shelter, about the children, about the small things that made her world worth saving. One afternoon, while she was helping him walk the length of the hallway, a group of men in tailored suits entered the hospital. They moved with a purpose, their presence heavy with quiet authority. One of them stopped beside Liam and said, "Mr. Hayes, we need your signature on the merger papers if we're to complete liquidation." He looked at them calmly, then at Elena before replying. "Do it, sell everything." She stared at him, startled. "What are you doing?" He smiled faintly. "Setting myself free." By evening, the news was everywhere. Liam Hayes had sold his entire empire for a fraction of its worth. The man who once built towers higher than the clouds now owned nothing. His mother refused to see him. Shareholders called him unstable. The world called him foolish. But for the first time in his life, Liam looked at peace. When Elena confronted him about it, he said, "I built walls when what I needed was roots. I don't want to own anymore. I just want to live." They spent more time together, walking along quiet streets where no one recognized him. One night, they sat on the rooftop of the shelter where their story had begun. The city stretched out below them, glowing like embers. She asked him, "What will you do now?" He said, "Build something smaller, something that matters." She looked at him and saw it. The truth behind every lie he'd ever told. This was the man she had fallen for. The mechanic, the dreamer, the broken soul still trying to rebuild. But peace never lasts for long that night. As they were leaving the shelter, a car pulled up, black windows glinting in the streetlight. Margaret Hayes stepped out, her expression a mix of fury and desperation. "You've thrown away generations of legacy," she said. "You've humiliated this family." Liam stood tall, his voice steady. "The legacy was already broken. I'm just ending the illusion." Margaret turned her anger toward Elena. "This is your fault. You turned him into this," she spat. But before Elena could answer, Liam stepped between them. "I chose this," he said. And for the first time, Margaret faltered her son, no longer the obedient heir, but a man who had found something worth defying her for. The confrontation ended in silence. Margaret left her driver speeding away into the night, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and heartbreak. Liam exhaled heavily, his hands shaking. Elena took his hand and said softly, "You just burned every bridge you had." He looked at her, eyes shining with quiet fire. "Then maybe it's time to build a new one together." Later that night, he returned to the construction site where he had almost died months earlier. The skeleton of the half-built structure still stood abandoned under the moonlight. He told Elena, "This was supposed to be another monument to power, but I want it to become something different, a place for people who have nothing left." She realized then what he meant to do. He was going to rebuild it as a foundation, a home, a second chance for everyone like him, broken but unafraid. And as dawn crept over the city, the first beams of light touching the steel frames, Liam turned to her, his voice trembling. "This is where it all started, and this is where I'll prove that love, not money, not power, is the only thing worth building forever." She took his hand, feeling the warmth of sunrise against their skin, unaware that somewhere far away, someone was watching them through a camera lens, setting in motion one last storm that would test the very limits of their love. The morning the foundation opened was bright and still. The sky a clear reflection of everything they had survived. The building, once a shattered dream, now stood complete sunlight, glinting off the glass panels that bore no corporate name, only a simple plaque that read, "The Reed Foundation. Hope for all." Elena stood beside Liam, watching as volunteers filled the courtyard, children laughing, families gathering around the new community center. The same people who once had nothing now had a place to belong. Reporters had been invited, but Liam refused interviews. He wanted no cameras, no headlines, only faces that remembered kindness. He walked Among them, shaking hands, thanking workers helping carry supplies, the same man who once owned half the city now looked most at home among those who owned nothing but gratitude. Elena couldn't stop watching him, the quiet strength in his voice. The way people smiled when he spoke, he had changed, and not because of her, but because he had finally faced himself. As the crowd settled, a dark sedan pulled up on the far end of the street, and for a moment the air shifted. Margaret Hayes stepped, out her heels clicking against the pavement, her presence drawing every eye. She looked older, smaller, her pride cracked by time and regret. She approached her son, her voice trembling. "You sold everything, and yet you built this," she said softly. "I don't understand why." Liam's tone was calm, "because I needed to lose the world to find what mattered." She turned her gaze to Elena, her eyes tired, not angry anymore. "You're the woman he gave it all up for, aren't you?" Elena nodded, but I didn't ask. "Him too," she replied. "He did it because love doesn't survive in cages." Margaret's expression wavered, her voice lowering. "I was wrong to think love could be measured in legacy." She touched her son's face briefly before stepping back, tears glistening. "For the first time in years, maybe this is the legacy after all," she whispered before leaving through the crowd that parted silently for her as evening fell. The volunteers lit candles across the courtyard, their glow reflecting against the glass walls. Liam took Elena's hand and led her to the rooftop overlooking the city below. The same skyline that once defined him now simply shimmered like a memory. The wind tugged at her hair. He turned to her, eyes full of quiet awe. "We lost everything, and somehow it gave us everything back." She smiled. "You didn't lose yourself, Liam. You just stopped pretending." He reached into his pocket, pulling out something small, the silver band she had once thrown at him during the confrontation months ago. He had kept it all this time. He slipped it back onto her finger and whispered this time, "No secrets, no lies, just truth." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I loved the man who fixed my car in the rain," she said, "and I loved the man who built hope out of ruin." They kissed under the fading light, their silhouettes framed by the soft glow of candles below. But the story didn't end with their kiss. As the night deepened, Liam received a call from the city council. They wanted to expand the foundation across every district, using his designs and Elena's medical programs. Together, their vision would reach thousands. He hung up and looked at her, the future stretching wide before them. They had no fortune left, but they had purpose and each other. Months later, on a quiet evening at the same auto shop where it all began, Elena closed the garage door, the smell of oil and rain still lingering. Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, whispering, "Remember this place?" She nodded. "It's where I found a poor man who didn't know he was already rich in all the ways that mattered." He smiled and pressed his forehead to hers, and she whispered again, "I love you," the same words that had started everything outside thunder. Rumbled softly, but this time it wasn't a warning, it was a song of beginning, as rain began to fall over the city, washing away the last traces of their old lives. Liam whispered against her hair, "I was never the millionaire who found love. I was the man who was saved by it, and under that rain, they stood together, no masks, no titles, no lies, just two souls who had finally learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to know what love is, and that the truest riches are found in hearts."